Man insults Tom Hanks on a first-class flight, instantly regrets it when the truth is revealed. With a tone of disdain, the man looked down on Tom Hanks, unaware that his regret would come swiftly and unmistakably. Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, was always bustling in the early morning. The clatter of rolling suitcases, the steady announcements over the loudspeakers, and the reflections of crystal chandeliers created an atmosphere of sophistication. Amidst the crowded stream of passengers, Lucas Davenport and Tom Hanks formed a stark contrast. Lucas, a successful businessman in the luxury automobile industry, exuded confidence in a European red suit, polished Italian leather shoes, and a gleaming gold watch. Arrogance radiated from him. Money was his measure of worth, and first class was where he belonged. In contrast, Tom Hanks appeared like an ordinary traveler, dressed in an old t-shirt, faded jeans, and carrying a worn-out backpack. Though unassuming, he carried an air of kindness and composure, radiating warmth and approachability, qualities that masked the fact that he was a legendary actor and a member of the ultra-wealthy elite. Lucas immediately took notice of Tom. His first reaction was a mix of irritation and suspicion. What's going on with business class these days? How could they let an old man dressed so shabbily stand in the same line as me? Disdainful thoughts rose in Lucas's mind. The atmosphere in the LAX first-class lounge became livelier as an announcement played over the speakers. This flight's entire first-class cabin, along with all premium services, has been fully sponsored by a generous passenger. Every traveler in first class will have the opportunity to enjoy all the amenities free of charge. The lounge buzzed with excitement. Passengers murmured among themselves, intrigued by the identity of the mysterious benefactor. Who could be rich enough to book the entire first-class cabin? It must be some billionaire or tycoon. Lucas Davenport, however, remained seated, legs crossed, arms folded, feigning indifference. To him, first class was the domain of the elite. He was convinced that he was the kind of passenger who truly deserved to be there. Everyone else was just riding on someone else's generosity. Then, something caught Lucas's eye, making him smirk with disdain. An old man, casually dressed in a worn-out t-shirt and faded jeans, carrying a frayed backpack. The man quietly settled into a corner, pulling out an old book and reading, completely uninterested in the luxury surrounding him. Lucas scoffed, crossing his arms. Turns out he's just some lucky guy who snagged a free ticket. And now he's pretending to read a book in the first-class lounge. Doesn't even know how to enjoy the experience. He tilted his head slightly and spoke just loud enough for those nearby to hear. People like this get to sit in first class now. Business class really has lost its exclusivity. A few nearby passengers frowned at Lucas's arrogance, but no one spoke up. Tom Hanks, the target of the insult, merely turned a page in his book, completely ignoring the remark. His calmness only irritated Lucas further. Finally, boarding was announced. The first-class cabin was spacious and lavish, featuring fully reclining leather seats, a premium bar stocked with fine liquor, and attentive flight attendants. Lucas settled in, relishing the luxury as if it were his personal domain, until he noticed a familiar figure entering the cabin, ticket in hand. Tom Hanks. And his seat was right next to Lucas. Lucas's jaw dropped in shock. "What? You're sitting here?" Tom smiled kindly. "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat." Lucas stared at the ticket in Tom's hand, then quickly glanced at his own seat number. It was a match. Ush. A slow-burning fury began to rise in Lucas. "I have to sit next to him for the next 10+ hours," he thought bitterly. Forcing a smirk, Lucas sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like we're going to be neighbors for quite a while, so tell me, what do you do for a living?" Tom remained calm and composed. "I work in the film industry." Lucas raised an eyebrow before bursting into laughter. "Film industry? Ha. So what do you do, backstage work? Running errands? Or maybe hauling props around?" A few passengers turned to look at Lucas, their gazes filled with disapproval at his rudeness. Tom didn't react, he simply smiled slightly and returned to his book. But it was precisely that indifference that ignited Lucas's wounded pride. He wanted to see Tom lose his temper, to provoke him into anger, just to prove that he was superior. Yet Tom remained unbothered, as if Lucas's mockery held no weight at all. Narrowing his eyes, Lucas raised his voice so that everyone nearby could hear. "A guy like you could only be in first class because of someone else's generosity. There's no way you could afford it on your own. Even if you were invited, you're nothing more than a freeloader. A few nearby passengers began whispering among themselves. A middle-aged woman shook her head in disapproval, while an older man sighed, clearly tired of Lucas's arrogance. But Tom merely placed his book down gently, looked at Lucas for a second, then smiled. Perhaps it's a gift for all of us, regardless of wealth or status. Lucas's irritation flared at that response. He snapped. That generosity should be reserved for people of class like me, not some pathetic nobody like you. Now more passengers started paying attention. Some looked at Lucas with visible annoyance, displeased by his offensive remarks. But Lucas ignored them, continuing his verbal assault. His frustration burned hotter, fanned by the fact that Tom remained unshaken. Lucas could no longer contain himself. The thought of having to sit next to some old man in cheap clothes was driving him mad. The airline made a huge mistake letting a ragged beggar like you into first class, he shouted furiously. This is the worst flight ever. Why don't you just get back to economy where you belong? Not stopping there, Lucas stormed toward Tom's seat, jabbing a finger at him and yelling. You have no place here. Just then, the head flight attendant arrived. Lucas immediately raised his voice. Stewardess, where's the head stewardess? I need to speak to her right now. Lucas's outburst disrupted the entire first-class cabin. Passengers turned their heads, murmuring in confusion. A female flight attendant hurried over, maintaining a professional smile. Yes, sir. How may I assist you? Lucas aggressively pointed at Tom. This man, he doesn't belong here. He's obviously not a first-class passenger. Look at the way he dresses, the way he acts. You should remove him from this cabin. First class isn't meant for lowly peasants like him. His voice rang out sharp and dripping with contempt. A stunned silence spread through the cabin. Many passengers winced at his words. Phrases like doesn't belong and lowly peasants hung in the air like daggers, cutting through the once peaceful atmosphere. The tension in first class escalated as Lucas continued berating the flight attendant, refusing to acknowledge his own behavior. Around him, passengers began murmuring louder, many shaking their heads in disgust. Unbelievable. How is someone this rude even sitting in first class? So arrogant, he should be the one getting kicked out. Suddenly, a man in an elegant black suit slowly stood up. His sharp eyes locked onto Lucas, his expression composed but tinged with unmistakable disdain. His voice was deep, steady, and carried an air of authority that filled the cabin. You need to stop, right now. Lucas frowned, about to protest, but the man cut him off, his tone turning even more commanding. I am the one who purchased all the first-class seats on this flight, and I refuse to tolerate someone as disrespectful as you in my cabin. His words struck like thunder. Lucas froze, his eyes blinking rapidly, struggling to process what had just been said. You, what did you just say? The man crossed his arms over his chest, his expression turning icy as he replied. I purchased every first-class seat to ensure the comfort of all passengers on this flight, and I have the right to decide who stays. I request that the flight attendants remove you from this cabin immediately. The declaration sent a wave of murmurs through the first-class cabin. A few passengers clapped in agreement, while others couldn't help but voice their support. That's right, get him out of here. He doesn't deserve to be here. Lucas's eyes widened in disbelief, his face turning red with fury. He clenched his teeth, glaring at the man who had just humiliated him. His voice was sharp and venomous. Who do you think you are to kick me out? I'm a long-time VIP customer. I spend tens of thousands of dollars a year flying first class. This airline wouldn't dare touch me. The man smirked, his lips curling into a cold, indifferent smile. He didn't argue, he simply turned to the head flight attendant, his tone calm yet absolute. I purchased every seat in first class. According to the contract, I have the authority to decide who stays. If he refuses to leave, I will request the flight crew's intervention. The head flight attendant hesitated for a moment, but it was clear that the man was within his rights. At the same time, a security officer appeared in the aisle, ready to step in if Lucas refused to comply. Lucas felt his heart pound wildly, sweat forming on his forehead. He had never been humiliated like this before. But just as the security officer was about to move forward, a deep, steady voice cut through the tension. Stop. Every head in the cabin turned toward the one who had spoken. Tom Hanks. He was still seated, but he had placed his book down, lifting his gaze toward Lucas. His expression was a mix of warmth and sharpness, his eyes calm yet carrying a hint of sadness. His voice remained gentle and composed. "This isn't necessary." The man who had purchased the entire cabin turned to Tom, looking slightly perplexed. "But he disrespected you. I can't allow that to happen." Tom shook his head slightly, his voice unwavering. "I don't need anyone to respect me. I only hope that people learn to respect one another." Lucas stiffened, his brow furrowing as he stared at Tom. Suddenly, the words of the man in the suit echoed in his mind. "I am a representative of Mr. Tom Hanks, the legendary actor. He personally requested to purchase every first-class seat on this flight." At that moment, everything clicked. Lucas stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat, his eyes locked onto Tom's face. There was no mistaking it now. This was Tom Hanks, one of the most beloved actors in the world. Lucas's jaw slackened, his entire body stiff with shock. His mind reeled as if he had just been struck by lightning. I just insulted Tom Hanks. I just called a Hollywood legend a pathetic nobody." Shame surged over him like a tidal wave. His vision blurred, his hands trembled, and sweat dripped down his temples. The murmurs of the surrounding passengers grew louder, some shaking their heads, others smirking in amusement. Lucas couldn't believe his own ears. The very man he had arrogantly tried to throw out of first class was Tom Hanks, the man admired by millions across the globe. Tom slowly stood up, stepping toward Lucas. His expression remained gentle, but there was a depth in his gaze that made Lucas feel unbearably small. "Whether or not you know who I am doesn't matter," Tom said quietly. "What truly matters is how you treat people when you think they don't matter." Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but those words sliced through his pride like a knife. His throat tightened, his face burned with humiliation. Tom didn't scold him, didn't degrade him in front of everyone. Instead, he simply placed a firm yet kind hand on Lucas's shoulder and spoke in a steady voice. "A seat in first class doesn't determine a person's worth, but the way we treat others does." Lucas felt as though a heavy weight had been placed on his chest. His head dropped, his voice failing him. Before disembarking, Lucas hesitated, then slowly approached Tom, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm truly sorry. I didn't know I was wrong." Tom gave him a warm, knowing smile. "Hold on to this lesson." Lucas lowered his head, his ears burning with shame. He realized that his mistake wasn't just in insulting a famous person, it was in judging anyone based on appearances alone. As the plane landed in Tokyo, Lucas walked off with a heavy heart. The arrogance and cockiness he once carried had vanished. His eyes no longer gleamed with self-importance but with the weight of regret. Fate had a strange way of working. Lucas also had business in Tokyo. He planned to stay for a few days to meet with partners. While at his hotel, he overheard news that Tom Hanks would be attending a public event, engaging with Japanese fans and the press at a large convention center. Remembering the harsh words he had spewed on the plane, Lucas made a firm decision he would go there and apologize publicly, in front of everyone. He hoped that by doing so he could at least begin to redeem himself. On the day of the event, the convention center was packed. Fans lined up for a chance to take photos, get autographs, or simply see the legendary actor they admired. On stage, Tom Hanks was in high spirits, warmly sharing stories about his film career, his most cherished roles, and his deep love for Japan's culture and people. The audience listened attentively, breaking into applause after each heartfelt anecdote. Lucas struggled through the crowd, trying to make his way to the main hall. His heart pounded, his legs trembled at the thought of facing Tom in front of hundreds of watchful eyes. A part of him wanted to turn back, to escape the humiliation. But he steeled himself. If I don't have the courage to apologize properly, I'll never be at peace. As Tom Hanks finished his talk, Lucas gathered his nerve and stepped forward onto the stage. Security guards immediately moved in to stop him, but before they could remove him, he called out loudly, "Please, just 1 minute. I just want to apologize to Mr. Tom Hanks." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Many were confused about what was happening. The security guards hesitated when Tom himself raised a hand, signaling them to let Lucas speak. Lucas stepped up to the microphone, bowed his head, and with a shaky voice confessed, "My name is Lucas Davenport. I was the fool who insulted you on the flight from Los Angeles. I spoke to you with contempt, demanding that you be removed to economy class. It was an awful thing to do, and I deeply regret it. I came here today to publicly apologize to you and to everyone who was on that flight. Please forgive me." The moment he finished, murmurs spread through the audience. Some had already heard about the incident after a passenger from the first-class cabin had recorded and shared it online. Then, the outrage began. "What a rude man," someone shouted. "Who does he think he is?" another sneered. The atmosphere grew tense as anger swelled among the crowd. Sensing the situation, Tom Hanks stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder before turning to address the audience. His voice was calm yet firm. "Everyone, please, let's be calm. I accept this apology. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we respond to them afterward. If he truly regrets his actions, I believe we should give him a chance." The audience quieted. Tom continued, his words carrying a profound weight. "I don't want to see anyone attacked or shamed. Judging a person based on one moment of their life isn't enough. We all have moments of weakness, and if we hold on to anger forever, we miss the opportunity to understand one another." Though simple, Tom's words struck deep. The tension in the room softened as the crowd absorbed his message of kindness and understanding. Lucas, overwhelmed with emotion, couldn't hold back his tears. Thank you for forgiving me. I promise I'll change." Tom smiled warmly and shook Lucas's hand, a gesture of genuine acceptance. Applause erupted, not just for Tom's generosity, but for the powerful lesson in compassion he had demonstrated. For Lucas, that moment was life-changing. He walked away from the event feeling reborn. The values he once held, expensive clothes, flashy cars, luxury watches, suddenly seemed insignificant. He felt ashamed of his past arrogance and even more so for how he had mistreated a kind and respectable man like Tom Hanks. When he started his business meetings in Tokyo, he carried a new mindset. He treated his colleagues and partners with respect, genuinely listening instead of asserting dominance. Over time, people noticed the change: a humbler, more considerate Lucas, far different from the man he once was. Beyond his personal transformation, Lucas also began setting aside a portion of his business profits for charity, helping the homeless, supporting underprivileged children, and contributing to meaningful causes. When asked why he had chosen this path, he would recall Tom Hanks's words, "Success isn't about what we flaunt, it's about how we treat others." And indeed, Lucas lived by that principle. No longer did he throw money around to impress people or belittle those he deemed beneath him. The generosity that Tom Hanks had shown him that day had opened his eyes to a new way of living, one built on respect, empathy, and true human connection.